Hello, BookTube. Just the other day, Katie at Books and Things did a great video called Let's Talk About Anthony Trollope. She's our BookTube's resident Victorianist, and she went through 7 reasons why Trollope is appealing. She ranks him just behind Elizabeth Gaskell and her beloved Charles Dickens. I rank him, as far as Victorian novelists go, behind no one. I love him dearly, and I wanted to go through her list. Her first reason was accessible writing. And it's true. Trollope was accused in his own time of artless writing, and that has aged well. His writing can be a little bit on the fusty side sometimes, but he's mostly very, very readable, which isn't true of a lot of Victorian writers. Even some of our most famous ones tend to indulge in the Byzantine wording that was the fashion at the time. And then her second reason was that he's witty. Not the kind of, as she points out, not the kind of slapstick humor that Dickens favored, but rather a kind of dry wit. And it's true, some of his wit will go right by you. There are some scenes in Trollope where you won't realize at first that he's mocking everything because he's being so po-faced about it. But also he has a wonderful ability to do more overt humor. His comic set pieces are pricelessly good. There's one in Barchester Towers, for instance, that no reader of the novel will ever forget. Then her third reason was that his plots are unconventional, and this is very true. The conventional Victorian plot for fiction was very predictable, and Trollope knew that. And especially once he developed a readership, once he became a name and once people knew him, he felt free to play around with those conventions to sometimes startling degrees, so that you don't always know the ending by the halfway point, which is the standard criticism of Victorian novels, that you know how it's going to end. Like, if there are young people in love, you just assume that the book is going to end in a series of weddings. With Trollope, you can't be sure of that. Famously, some of his characters don't get married. When in the hands of virtually any other Victorian novelist, they would, especially a serializing Victorian novelist, someone whose willingness to please the majority of his reading audience translates directly into sales of issues. Authors like that usually don't have the cobbles to defy those wishes, and Trollope routinely does. Then her fourth reason was that he has fascinating pet themes. She mentions morality, the theme of public and private, upper class, lower class morality that pervades the Barchester books. And that's absolutely true. And to that, I might add the themes of public duty that pervade the Palliser novels. Trollope wrote the Barchester novels, a series of novels that concentrate more or less in focus on rural clerical matters, which might sound, those of you who've never read Trollope, that might sound deadly dull, but his Barchester novels are anything but dull. And then he also wrote a much looser series, a series that he did not plan on being a series, called the Palliser novels, or the political novels, there are characters, the Plantagenet Palliser, who goes on to become the Duke of Omnium, and his wife, Glencora, sort of are the thread that weaves through the Palliser novels, although sometimes they're so far in the background that you can barely see them. And a thread that runs through the Palliser novels is duty, public duty, what it means to be a public servant, and selflessness, and also political theorizing, because Trollope was very active politically. I think most people who are familiar with Trollope probably like his Barchester novels best. I like his Palliser novels the most. I think they're wonderful, and I think by the end of the series of them, he was really starting to create something amazing. I mean, he was creating something amazing, but was starting to go even beyond that. I wish for 10 more Palliser novels. Reason number 5 was his realism, and Katie mentions that when he gives us flawed characters, they're not flawed in the sense of a Dickens flawed character, where Dickens is, they're twirling their mustaches and they are thoroughly evil. Even Trollope's most flawed characters aren't thoroughly evil. There's a temptation on his part that he tries to convey to the reader to feel a certain amount of sympathy, even when he's created a character who is thoroughly despicable or insane. There's still a current of sympathy, a way to look at them in the round. And another aspect of Trollope's realism that I might mention is money. The Victorian novelists were really, really good about writing about large amounts of money, and they were really, really good about writing about very small amounts of money, almost no money, abject poverty. But Trollope writes about money in the middle. It's a thing that Henry James never knew whether to praise him for or condemn him for. He writes about money in normal people's lives, which sounds prosaic until you try it. It's very hard to do. He writes about people who have to keep an eye on their bank balance. He writes about people who have to walk a certain distance instead of taking a taxi cab. And why? And the reason is money. And it's fascinating, especially since in his Barchester novels, though that middling range of money matters often touches on abject poverty, whether it's pensioners in an almshouse or extremely poor farming families. And in the Palliser novels, that middling range of money, the people who have money but they don't have money with a capital M, brushes on the other side, on the upper side, when people who have vast amounts of money, unthinkable amounts of money, and Trollope never loses sight of either, and that's wonderful. Then reason number 6 is his authorial voice, which I'm glad she pointed out, because it's absolutely true. Trollope is present in all of his novels, especially the later on in his career you go. He's very present as someone who is telling you the story. He's not going to tell you anything about himself. In the 21st century, if you got an authorial eye that cropped up in one chapter, you would need everything about that eye. You would need all of its details. You would need it to be unreliable. You would need it to have gone through childhood trauma of the kind that is fashionable that year, etc., etc., etc. There's no possible way in a 21st century novel that you could have an authorial eye just mentioned in chapter 10. Well, I don't particularly like either one of these people, but let's see what they're doing. That wouldn't work at all. And Trollope does it all the time. And not only does it all the time, but sometimes very overtly. Sometimes he'll not only intrude the authorial eye, who is not a character in the book, but he'll make it clear that that eye is the author. He'll say, well, here I'm afraid I'm going to have to try your patience, because none of the rest of this chapter is going to make any sense unless I give you some exposition. And I know as well as you do how boring that is, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'll try to make it as entertaining as possible. That's amazing. It's amazingly fun when an author is doing that, is self-assured enough to do that correctly, and he does always. His authorial presence is wonderful. And reason number 7 is one that was bound to come up in a 21st century video by by a reader who is young, which is that Trollope is not as problematic as most Victorian novelists might be. And she mentioned his sexism, that it's ordinarily when you're reading Victorian fiction, you're bumping up against sexism a lot. I maintain that Trollope is not sexist at all, which is amazing, considering that he was a rampant sexist in his real life. His female characters and their relation to the male characters, they're always challenging and fun and readable, and when they're great, they're greater than anything in Trollope, and I maintain greater than anything in Victorian literature. Trollope's great female characters, not just the heroines, but the complexly flawed female characters, are just amazingly realized people in their own right. I don't so much acquit Trollope of other kinds of problematic authorship, and I don't think Katie will either when she's read more Trollope. She mentions in her video that she's read 10 of his books. He wrote 50. So when she's read more of them, she might see the one in particular that even Trollope's devoutest defenders can't help but mention is anti-Semitism, which, I mean, Katie's right. He puts it in the mouth of some characters, and he has other characters condemn it. But it's pretty clear when you read his novels that he also feels it himself and didn't bother to examine it much, which is, I don't like the word problematic, of course. It implies that 21st century authors don't have flaws, and it also implies that your literary merit decreases as your woke quotient decreases, and I don't agree with any of that at all. A monster can write a great book. And also, as I've mentioned on this channel a couple of times, the state of wokeness is a sliding scale. It is completely unfair to judge the past by the present, just like you wouldn't want to be judged by the future. The future is going to have very unkind things to say about the way you live your life. The future is going to say, well, why on earth didn't any of them realize it? Surely you have to hold them accountable. And I don't believe you do. Even the best of intentions. Trollope didn't have the best of intentions. But even so, even the characters that he condemns or slightly, subtly slights for Jewishness. I'm thinking of The Way We Live Now. There are offhand comments about Michel Melmotte's wife that can't spring, in my opinion, can't spring from anything other than simple, unexamined anti-Semitism. And in The Prime Minister, in the novel The Prime Minister, one of my favorite Trollope novels, the climax of the Palliser novels, the main character is, well, his description, I mean, he's young and he's black-haired and he has an aquiline nose, and the descriptions waver between when Trollope or his characters are feeling positive, Portuguese, to when Trollope or his characters are feeling negative, Jew, sometimes both. And it's never, there's no other way to read it, in my opinion, in the context of the book, there's no other way to read it other than simple anti-Semitism. But even here, even in at his most problematic moments, he's saved, in my opinion, by what a companionable writer he is. So that unless you're determined to take offense, those elements are not going to bother you to the point where you're going to put the book down, which isn't true with a lot of Victorian novels, especially the ones that are now forgotten. But I love those 7 reasons. Those were his 7 reasons for liking Trollope, and I could easily add 100 more. I think he's a wonderful, wonderful author. And to that end, Katie mentioned in her video that she's thinking about doing in April. She's not sure yet, but she's thinking about doing Barchester Week in April, which is, Trollope was born in April. And she's thinking about doing Barchester Week, where she goes through the Barchester novels and just talks about them. And that gave me an idea that I want to float to the rest of you, since we have plenty of time. I'm thinking of doing the same thing, not Barchester Week, but a Trollope celebration in April. And what I'd like it to be is my very first read-along, where I pick a book, and if you want to join in, we do a certain number of chapters per week throughout the month of April. How does that sound? The book that I have in mind is this one. It's Can You Forgive Her? The first of the Palliser novels, which came to my mind because I was talking about Trollope with Deb, my friend Deb, the other day, and she mentioned that she wanted to start Can You Forgive Her? She wanted to start the Palliser series. And I don't think the Palliser novels, just like the Barchester novels, I don't think it really hurts you to start them anywhere. The first Palliser novel that I read was the last one, The Duke's Children. That was the first one that I read, and I loved it. I didn't feel like I was missing anything. But what I thought we'd do, if you're interested, if not, we don't have to try it. But what I thought we'd do is just break this up and read it throughout the month of April. And it's the middle of March now, even though it's blizzarding outside, so it doesn't feel like the middle of March. But that gives you plenty of time to either find a secondhand copy or go to Project Gutenberg and download a nice, clean copy of the text for free. The last time I read, it wasn't Can You Forgive Her? It was Phineas Finn. which is another Palliser novel. The last time I read Phineas Finn, I got it from Project Gutenberg and read it on my phone. So there's that, or any other, the library or whatever. Those of you who are interested, if enough of you are interested, then we'll do a read-through of Can You Forgive Her in April and talk all about it. But even if not, I still wanted to echo Katie's video because I love Trollope so much that I will try to remember to leave a link to her video down below because he's well worth your time. But anyway, I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.